Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Daredevil Season 2, Episodes 6 through 9. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review Daredevil in batches. So I have to give a spoiler warning for Daredevil up to Season 2, Episode 9. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, as I write this review, I have not seen past episode 9, so this video will be free of any spoilers beyond episode 9, so if you haven't seen past episode 9, then this video will be safe. So this next set of episodes were good, but not quite as amazing as the first set of episodes. I'm finding that this is a common trend in pretty much every show that I'm watching at the moment, that the quality tends to dip in the middle of the season. That being said, it was still quite good, and I'm still loving Season 2 of Daredevil overall. So let me jump right into this, starting with Episode 6, Regrets Only. So this episode begins with Elektra and how she tricked Matt into fighting the Yakuza who were sent there to kill her, and although Matt helps, he's really pissed and grills her for manipulating him and tells her to leave town and says that he won't help her anymore. However, she convinces him that the Yakuza are up to something huge in New York, and if she doesn't get help from him, they're gonna wreak havoc all over the city, so he reluctantly agrees. So then Matt, Foggy, and Karen meet with Frank Castle's lawyer, who's a public defender who seems terrible at his job and not particularly interested in helping him, and then he brings out the possibility of the death penalty, which is illegal in the state of New York. However, they're talking about extraditing him to Delaware where it is legal. So then Matt comes up with the idea that they should become Frank's lawyers, which Foggy is not okay with, but Matt always gets his way, so he talks him into it. So then the three of them go to the hospital to try to talk Frank into allowing them to represent him, and he doesn't seem particularly interested until Karen pulls out the picture of his family and tells him she went to his house. And then Reyes comes in, kicks them all out, and raises holy hell until Frank agrees to have them be his lawyers, mainly out of a desire to get back at Reyes and possibly get some answers. So I was wondering the whole time if Frank recognized Matt's voice and that he is the Daredevil, but there's nothing in there to indicate that he did, so I'm going to have to assume that he didn't. So Karen visits Frank again to learn more about his past and try to work out what's happening, and Foggy works out a deal where the death penalty is off the table and he gets a 25-year sentence. So he agrees, but when the judge shows up, he flips out and says not guilty in order to piss off Reyes, which of course totally pissed off Foggy. Meanwhile, Elektra whisks Matt away to a fancy party where they plan a heist to steal some files from a restricted hidden place, but set off all these alarms on their way out and got hunted by security, and they only managed to make it out there because they just went to another floor that is kind of accessible and then pretended to just be two people making out. So the goons let them go. However, they learned that the info they got was coded, so they don't know exactly what it means. Then Matt finally finds out what Frank did, and Foggy is pissed that he wasn't there and insists he needs to give this trial his full attention. So my rating for Regrets Only out of 10 is a 6 good. Overall, this episode was alright. Another cog in the machine with some tense moments, and it introduced the concept of the Punisher trial, which I think was a pretty interesting concept, but nothing about it really blew me away. So next we come to episode 7, Simpler Fidelis. So this episode begins with the montage of a potential jurors, members who have opinions are completely divided on Frank Castle, because some think that he's an absolute hero, where others think he's an absolute monster. However, the point is there seems to be very strong opinions on him either way. This was a nice little montage, but it doesn't really come into play later on, and therefore doesn't really seem all that necessary in the grand scheme of things. I suppose the main point is to show how big of a deal this trial is. So Matt and Foggy try to form a strategy, and they agree that the best defense is to say that Castle has PTSD, but when Karen floats that idea by him, he's completely against it and refuses to go along with it. But he does give them the name of a witness, his former CO in the Marines, who will testify to his character. Meanwhile, Foggy and Matt are swamped preparing for what they're calling the trial of the century when Elektra calls Matt and asks for help, but Matt insists he's too busy. But then Elektra tempts him and he can't resist. So he goes as Daredevil with Elektra to the man who created the code that they can't crack in order to pressure him until he decides to decode it, and they find that it leads to a freight train that the Yakuza are using for shipping. They track the train down and it's just filled with dirt. They then get attacked by a shitload of guys whom they promptly beat the shit out of, but for Matt's sake, Elektra doesn't kill any of them. So they go back to Matt's place and do some bonding, and Matt oversleeps from his exhaustion from all the fighting before, so he shows up to court rather late, and Foggy has to give the opening statement. He does a good job, but he's pretty pissed at Matt for not being there when he was supposed to. So they have to prepare for the next day, where they're going to question the doctor who dealt with Frank Castle in the past, who they're sure has doctored evidence and is lying about what happened. So Matt and Karen go back and hang out as Matt tells him his big plans to get the witness to talk, and Karen's all impressed. Then after Karen leaves, Elektra shows up, and in fact she was there before Karen left, eavesdropping on their conversation, but waited until Karen left to make her appearance. Then the next day in court, Matt goes to deal with the testimony of the doctor, and he immediately admits that he doctored the evidence and lied. He then explains that a woman with an accent threatened him if he didn't admit to it. Of course, the woman is Elektra, but once the judge hears that he was threatened, she throws out his whole testimony. So Matt finally confesses to Foggy about Elektra and what they've been up to, and their investigation into the Yakuza. Foggy loses his shit and yells at Matt, and rightfully so, as it was his idea in the first place to take this case, but he spends all this time with Elektra instead. So Matt is pissed off at Elektra and confronts her, tells her to stay out of his business, and she's like, fine, whatever, I don't really care anyway. They then go back to attacking the Yakuza stronghold to see what they're hiding, and after they beat their way through a shitload of men, they find a giant hole in the ground. I still have no idea what the deal with this hole is, but whenever they drop something down it, they don't even hear it drop. So apparently this hole is huge. My first thought was they're building a hole to China, like, in the Bugs Bunny cartoons. But of course, there's no realism to that whatsoever. But then again, this is a comic book TV show, so who knows. But I don't think they'll go that silly. So my rating for Simple Fidelis is a 7, very good. The trial aspect of this episode was interesting, and to see Foggy blow up at Matt was great because frankly it was well deserved, and I liked how this episode dealt with Matt trying to juggle his two lives. But overall, there was nothing in this episode to make it great. It was pretty by the numbers. Next episode is episode 8, Guilty as Sin. So this episode begins where the last one left off, with Daredevil and Elektra having to fight off these badass ninjas. Now these ninjas seem a lot more skilled and dangerous than the other Yakuza goons that they had to face, as indeed Daredevil couldn't even hear them coming and had to listen to their weapons in order to know where they were. In fact, they're so badass they beat and severely injure Elektra and almost kill Daredevil until Stick shows up and saves the day. He then drives them away to safety, while they're being chased by a shitload of them, but they eventually shake them. And Stick manages to get them back to Matt's place, where Elektra is dying from poison, so Stick has to use his voodoo in order to save her. Meanwhile, the Punisher trial continues, and of course Matt is otherwise occupied to show up, so Foggy has to take over when he's not entirely confident to do so. So Frank's former CEO shows up and tells a great story about how Frank saved a whole shitload of people in an operation where the officer in charge made a huge mistake and was being an idiot, and they almost died if not for Frank. Then Reyes counters, asking him how he could know all this, and he reveals that he was the idiot that made the mistake. So this comes as a huge victory for the defense, as it succeeds in painting Frank as in a very positive light. I really like this scene. I didn't expect that slight twist in the story, and the Colonel was played by Clancy Brown, quite a well-known actor all the way back from the first Highlander movie to The Shawshank Redemption. So it was great seeing him in this role, and I thought they pulled it off really well. Meanwhile, Matt interrogates Stick to find out what's really going on, and Stick reveals that their real enemy isn't the Yakuza, but an ancient organization known as the Hand. And Stick is a part of a group who is their mortal enemy, sworn to take them down, known as the Chaste. He also tells him that the Hand have the ability to raise from the dead, and their ultimate goal is to acquire a weapon known as Black Sky. Meanwhile, at the trial, Foggy brings up an expert doctor to testify that Frank is suffering from a syndrome due to his, that causes emotional stress due to the injuries he suffered when he lost his family. Frank is not so sure about this defense, as he thinks it sounds a bit too similar to PTSD, but he allows it. So things are looking really up for Frank until a teenager yells out that Frank killed his dad, and thus they're acting like this really, really hurt their case. Legally, the jury isn't supposed to consider this, so that can't legally be used against Frank, so I don't really know about this. I realized for story purposes they needed to introduce a drawback to Frank's case in order to raise the stakes and put them in a position that they're about to lose, but I don't buy it. I think they made far too much progress with the Colonel and the doctor's testimony that to say all this was undone just by one kid yelling, I'm sorry, but I just don't buy it. But, regardless, Foggy and Karen are now acting like they're going to lose, so Karen insists the only way out is to put Frank on the stand, and Foggy insists that Matt must be the one to question him. So we cut back to Matt and Elektra, where Matt confronts her about Stick, saying they already knew each other, and Matt realizes she was one of his students and that their whole relationship in the first place was a setup by Stick in order to win him back. And of course Matt isn't very happy about this. Elektra is a part of the Chaste, and all this time they were investigating Elektra was using Matt in her war against the Hand. But then Karen shows up and to tell Matt about the trial, and she catches him talking to Elektra, who's in his bed, and he tries to explain it, but she runs out. And in court, he tries to apologize to her, but she's not hearing it. So in other words, both Foggy and Karen are pissed at Matt. So he shows up to question Frank, but instead of following Foggy's strategy of making him out to be suffering from an affliction, he tries to paint him as a hero. This backfires when Frank sabotages his own case and declares he isn't sick and that he's guilty. Matt can tell he's being coerced by a guard and tries to tell Foggy and Karen about it, but they're so pissed they're not hearing it. Back with Elektra, she goes to Stick and tells him that she's going to be completely devoted to Matt now and agreed to do things his way, and tells Stick to leave. Of course, he doesn't take too kindly to this and starts to come up with his own plan. So Matt comes back to Elektra, who's completely devoted to her now, and I gotta be honest, I really bought their chemistry here. I think it really works here much better than it did between Matt and Karen. So I found myself warming up to Elektra a lot more than I thought I would. But of course, this tender moment doesn't last when an assassin shows up and tries to kill them both and almost succeeds, until Elektra comes along and slits his throat, directly defying Matt's no-killing policy. And then we finish the episode seeing the corrupt guard take Castle to the prison. He takes him to meet directly with the Kingpin. which I actually thought was a pretty good ending. It was pretty shocking, so I'm not complaining. So my rating for Guilty as Sin is an 8, extremely good. I love courtroom dramas. That's actually one of the procedural dramas I actually like. And as I said, I bought Matt and Electra's chemistry and her inner conflict with having to choose between him and Stick. But overall, I'm not all that invested in this storyline with the hand, and felt the courtroom situation was kind of rendered pointless when Frank just threw the case out anyway, but still a pretty intense episode. So finally, we get to episode 9, 7 Minutes in Heaven, which interestingly enough starts off by telling us Wilson Fisk's backstory and what happened to him since he got sent to prison, and how he slowly managed to take control of the prison by buying off loyalties of certain prisoners and guards. However, there's still one man who stands in his way, who has absolute control of the drug trade in the prison, and he is the head honcho there. But it just so happens that this man was involved in the incident in which Frank Castle's family was killed, which is why Fisk went out of his way to get the Punisher sent to his prison, where he could have a meet and greet. There he comes to an arrangement with him that Fisk will help get the Punisher to be close to the warlord so he can kill him and get the information and revenge that he wants, and Fisk gets his greatest adversary eliminated in return. So Frank agrees to this deal, but makes it clear that he hates Fisk and never wants to see him again. Meanwhile, Elektra saves Matt's life and eliminates the evidence, but Matt is pissed off that she killed when she said she wouldn't, so they have a huge falling out where he refuses to work with her and says that he'll go after the hand by himself. So then Foggy comes over and they have it out as well, which pretty much signals the end of Nelson and Murdoch. So essentially, Matt manages to alienate all of his friends, Foggy, Karen, Elektra, Stick. None of them want anything to do with them anymore. So Matt he's in a pretty dark place, and to be honest, I'm not really happy with the storyline. While I bought Matt and Elektra's relationship, I felt their falling out happened a bit too suddenly, and overall I think Matt is acting like an idiotic jerk, if you ask me, so I'm not interested in following his story so much anymore. Meanwhile, Karen continues to investigate what happened to Frank and essentially becomes an investigator with the newspaper, as the reporter guy thought she did a pretty good job. Back in prison, the Punisher kills the man he was sent to kill and gets some information about a man called the Blacksmith, who apparently was responsible for arranging the whole gang war that killed his family. He also learned that it was a sting operation that Reyes set up in order to get the Blacksmith, but it went wrong and everyone got killed, which she was pretty much responsible for. So apparently that's what she's been hiding the whole time. So after the Punisher does the deed, the guards under Fisk's payroll don't let him out, and instead let out all the other prisoners in the block. In other words, Fisk double-crossed him and set him up to die, but instead the Punisher kicks all of their asses and kills them all. After he saw him do that, Fisk decided to set Frank free, as he could see how big of a killing machine Frank is, and he'd rather have him out there killing off all of his competition for him. So Frank, of course, grabs the opportunity to escape, but tells Fisk that he will kill him if he ever sees him again. So my question is, if the guards are under Fisk's control so absolutely that he can simply let Frank walk free, why doesn't he just walk out himself? I know the easy answer is that he wants to regain respectability and get out of jail legally so he can go back to his old life rather than be a fugitive on the run, but I don't know, because his reputation has already been so thoroughly discredited. I'm not sure that it would really make that big of a difference. Meanwhile, Matt goes after the hand by going after the accountant guy for more information, and it turns out that they are holding his son hostage. So Matt goes with him to try to rescue his son, and he finds him along with several other people who are hooked up to this weird thingy where they look all drugged out, and there was the tubes going in from their arms into this machine. So Daredevil tries to free them, but then that guy who totally kicked his ass in season 1 shows up again and kicks his ass again and takes off with this machine. So when Daredevil mentions that he's dead, he saw him die, he replies by saying there's no such thing, which honestly I found a bit cheeseball. So my rating for 7 Minutes in Heaven is a 5 average. I liked getting the Wilson Fick backstory. And the storyline that played out in prison with the Punisher, that was pretty intense. Everything else in this episode I was not a huge fan of. The Elektra Daredevil breakup felt forced. They turned Matt into an unlikable character, and this Hand storyline is getting far too comic booky for my tastes. So that's it for my review of Daredevil Season 2, Episodes 6 through 9. Be sure to check back here next week when I review the final 4 episodes of Season 2 of Daredevil, and make sure to check out my channel for many other videos on shows like Game of Thrones, Star Trek, The Walking Dead, Better Call Saul, Vikings, and more. And be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.